everybody. Welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast. Broke out the Spanish mandola, as I promised a viewer. It's a weird instrument. Out of tune as quick as you play it, but it's beautiful. Handmade in Barcelona at Casa Paramon, which is a wonderful luthier Jackson Brown turned me on to. David Crosby said it was weird when I showed up with that thing. He said, "Cool, man, weird." When I showed up with it at the airport the next day, I got it on a CSN tour. We had a day off in Barcelona on a really fun tour, I believe, 2013. And I picked that up. I would save my per diems and buy instruments. And I remember running through the airport in France and Nice, trying to catch my plane a couple weeks later in flip-flops, dragging that thing back to the East Coast. And it sits in the vault now, which is an extra bedroom where I keep all the guitars that aren't in the barn, the house guitars. I haven't gotten to the barn guitars. When I started this podcast, I was going to use a different instrument at the opening of every one, and I haven't kept that promise, but I have plenty of instruments that I haven't featured, so maybe I will. Who knows? I'll be too arthritic to play by the time I get that done, the rate I'm going, but doing the best I can. I hope everybody's doing well. What a time. First 100 days, right? I don't want to talk about that idiot all night. I want to talk about a couple key things that are happening, but you know what's going on. You don't need me to tell you. I'm not trying to break down the news, and I'm not trying to steal your attention. I appreciate the nice comments on this podcast. I know this whole online thing is a weird world, and it's a weird world out there too, but at least the real world has beauty in it. I don't see a lot of beauty online. I see a lot of nice people that care, and that's comforting, but most of what I see is Trump, because he knows how to dominate the narrative, and all the influencers on the left are retweeting him all day long anyway, because that's what pays the bucks, And a year before the campaign, I was trying to warn people against that, and they didn't want to hear it, and that's fine. There was a lot of money to be made, and there's still money to be made, and people are making a lot of money, which sucks, because that system is going to guarantee Trump is going to stay front and center for a long time. After the 2020 election, if people had just fucking made him irrelevant and didn't, tweet everything he said and every little clip every 5 seconds and every clip from a rally, it would have been a lot easier to build the case against Joe Biden, or for Joe Biden rather, but that's not what happened, because the money was on Trump, and he knew that, and the money is still there, and it's all the same influencers we've seen this whole time. I'm personally sick of it, because I've met a bunch of them, and I know they're not in it for the right reasons. They're in it for themselves, and trust me, I've been in the room, but that's fine. If you're fans of that, it's all good. I don't care. I'm not doing this to make a buck. I make $70 a month off of my podcast. It's not enough. It's not enough to get me to fucking put Trump clips on it. I'll tell you that much. But it doesn't mean you can't talk about what he's doing. I just believe that you got to try to offer some hope and some substance and some insight. And if you don't have any of that, if you're just repeating stuff and trying to game the algorithm, you're just part of the problem as far as I'm concerned. You might be wearing a different jersey, but it's the same scam. And Trump knows this scam. He knows how to work the American media like a fiddle. He has his whole life. He's not as dumb as you think. He's ignorant. He's illiterate. He's uncultured. He's a pig and a predator, but he knows he knows who his marks are, and he knows how to manipulate them. And what I've been trying to drive home to people is that this is a cultural problem. right? It's not about just facts and statistics. And when they finally see how many jobs Biden has delivered, they're going to wake up. That's not what this thing was about. It's about peer pressure. You know, they don't want to go against their friends and neighbors who are pro-Trump because they live in towns that are pro-Trump, that have the American flags everywhere and that we support our troops and all the kind of like, you know, patriotic pablum, I call it. You know, actual support is well-meaning. They don't support the troops. He's cutting VA funding. He's cutting suicide hotlines. He's cutting food banks. You know, how many elderly veterans are going to these food banks? I just read about one in West Virginia yesterday in the paper that's serving like a thin soup and dried cranberries to their elderly customers. You know, people who rely on them to come and get a meal. It's beyond the pale what he's doing, but he's got such a not a loyal fan base. Like, he's got such an operation going that we can't strengthen his operation. And a lot of what's happening on the left is making him stronger. I told people that, you know, during the last campaign, they didn't want to hear it. I told the White House that they didn't want to hear it. You know, they stopped inviting me to their meetings. They only invited me to the White House once, but I was on these online meetings for a couple of years. And when I finally asked them why they were still on Twitter, they stopped inviting me because Twitter was their whole game. And Ian Sams told me, you know, he said in the meeting, he said, look, that's where we can reach the journalists and influence the narrative. And I'm like, you're not influencing the narrative. You're making influencers rich, you know, because you're giving them access and stuff. But you're not influencing the narrative. The media hates you. You're not going to sit Biden down with the New York Times. And we both know why you're not going to do that. So you're relying on the influencers instead. And they're retweeting Trump clips all day long because that's where their bread is buttered. So they'll take your access and they'll be like, yeah, rah, rah, we love the Democrats. But they're doing it to make a buck. It's not a savvy political strategy. It never was. It was doomed. We got lucky in 2020. Everybody was home. You know, people kind of like, they chilled out and they came to their senses. And then after 4 years, they were back to being idiots because they were out there in the world and they were bumping into their friends and neighbors that liked Trump and they were buying all the bullshit that was being sold them. And they're still buying this bullshit. The truth isn't going to sink into most of these people, even when the crackdowns come, which are coming this summer. He had an executive order this morning. You know, it was designed to strengthen our police and military and help them fight crime in our cities. What that's about is allowing people to crack, or allowing, you know, cops and military guys to crack down on protesters. That's what he wants to do because he knows the protests are going to get real, you know, this summer. Now they're important and they're nonviolent and they're peaceful, and that's wonderful. But in the summer, it's going to shift, and he's going to put infiltrators in there, and they'll blame it on Antifa when a store burns down or somebody gets shot. And of course, it'll be an agitator, you know, or it could be some knucklehead, you know, getting in the fight here, you know, thinking he's doing us a favor, and he's not. But it'll be something like that, and they'll send in the National Guard, and they'll fucking crack heads, and people won't know what hit them, and you'll be living under martial law. And that's, everything is gearing up to that. If you saw Rachel Maddow last night, she mentioned what he's doing at the border, where he's declaring it a military base. Basically, the southern border from Texas all the way to California, that strip of land, he's calling that zone a military zone. So the military could arrest people that were trespassing, because you're technically allowed to do that on a military base. The rest of the time, a military officer can't arrest an American citizen. That's the Posse Comitatus Act. You know, there's rules against that kind of stuff because we don't want to live in a dictatorship. He's finding little legal, loopholes to get around this, and that's what they're doing. These machinations are for the crackdown, and he's a brutal guy. Trust me when I tell you that. You already know that for yourself, but that's what's up. That's what's coming. So you want to be prepared. And I'm not, do what you need to do. I don't care. I'm not in this to make a buck. I make $70 a month off of this podcast, and that's up from the $0 a month I made the first 3 years I did it. I'm not doing this to get rich. I'm not doing this to get famous. I'm not asking you for retweets or sharing my stuff or building my brand. I really don't care about that. I appreciate the Substack supporters. That's how I make my living, that writing. But even that, I give it all away for free. I don't do anything subscriber only. I don't do community events. I appreciate everybody being involved, but I'm not trying to pull you online or your focus online, because I don't think that's where this battle is going to be won. I think you got to think of the internet as your enemy at this point, because it is. It's an algorithm that's directed at the base of your skull, at your brain, at your hippocampus or whatever it's called, right? Where you do your reasoning. They're trying to either get you angry and rage farm you, or tickle your sort of addiction or your cortisol, fight or flight instincts. And that's what happens. You get in this cycle where you're being manipulated by supercomputers. And the thing that happened was they monetized content. So everybody can make a buck potentially on the internet. And anybody who's on the internet can see, if you're on any of these sites, they'll send you all kinds of updates. You're making this much more this month and all this kind of stuff, which I avoid like the plague. I don't want to know that I'm making any money. I don't want to do anything for more likes or more money or any of that. And that's who I am. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. I get it. We're America. It's about a buck. It's about greed. But greed run amok is what got us into this mess. Unbridled greed, and a new technology called the internet that at the beginning everybody thought was going to be great and fun, and you'd hook up with some old buddies from high school or whatever. And what happened, right? Big money got involved. Politics got involved in terms of if we manipulate this, we can change people's minds and we can change how they actually think. And that's what Putin was ahead of the curve on. Putin knew how to manipulate this stuff. And he just needed the right person to implement it, and that was Kushner and Trump, because Kushner was the guy who went to Facebook, all his buddies from Harvard that were working for Facebook out in Menlo Park or wherever it was, and said, how do I micro-target people? How do I find the guy who voted for Obama, he's in a union, but he has a Kid Rock CD and he drives a pickup truck and he owns a gun, because I need to target that guy. And he learned how to micro-target from Facebook, and then he went to the Russians and said, here's the demographic we need to change their minds. And Putin and his troll farms and bot farms and influence peddlers and all this stuff targeted those people. And they smeared Hillary Clinton, and they pumped up Trump, and they started all these cultural wars and made up crap about trans children joining your sports teams and all this crazy stuff. And the media picked up on half of it like it was a real thing. These were manipulated situations, but they were placed in the American zeitgeist, and we sit around and argue about them, and they have real world impacts, because now people are targeted that nobody was messing with. You shouldn't be messing with a trans kid or person. You should celebrate them, help them live their truth, get out of their way. Don't feel threatened by them, especially if you're some meathead in the suburbs, but that's who that appealed to, because the kind of people that Trump appeals to are not that culturally sophisticated. I've known people who voted for Trump as adults since they were kids, and they didn't change. They didn't grow. They stayed in their hometown. They had a couple kids, and they got a mortgage. That's having more responsibility. That's not having more maturation and emotional sobriety and growth in life. And you're supposed to grow while you're here. You're supposed to get smarter. You're supposed to get better. You're supposed to expand your horizons, your ability to love and to assimilate other cultures and new things, right? When you're a kid, your world is small. You like cheeseburgers and playing baseball and living in your little town. Maybe you go camping with Cub Scouts every once in a while, or visit grandma in Florida. But when you get older, hopefully you get out there in the world a little bit. And I know travel's a luxury not everybody can do. I had to join the circus to see the world. I had to become a roadie, because that was the only way I could afford it. I mean, I had a Euro ticket when I was a kid, but I had to do what I had to do to get out there and see how the rest of the world was living. And when I got out there, I saw, fuck, man, they've been lying to me the whole time. We're not the greatest country on earth. We're big and rich and have a lot of talent and natural beauty and great music and art and stuff like that. But we also got a bunch of dumbasses. And we're kidding ourselves if we think we're doing it right and everywhere else is wrong. And I would hear that kind of rhetoric my whole life from American kids who never went anywhere. America's the greatest country on earth, bro. You're lucky you're here. You're free. What are you talking about? You know, first time I crossed a street in the Netherlands or Germany or something, I was like, oh my God, people are waiting for the crosswalk. They're not cutting each other off. I told you this story before. I stayed at a hotel on a CSN tour, and it was like somewhere in Denmark or something, you know, and there was a train station, or Netherlands, you know, Europe, right? Northern Europe. And there was a train station outside my hotel room, and all these bikes, you know, everyone rode a bike to the train station, then you get on the train station and take it into the center of town. And I looked at all these bikes, you know, I'm a cyclist, so I looked down there, I'm like, man, those are nice bikes. The people got some nice bikes around here. And I was psyched because there was like 1,000 of them. I'm like, that's cool. There's 1,000 people that ride to the train station. And then I noticed none of them were locked up. I was like, these guys aren't even locking up their bikes. And we went and did the gig later that day. And Crosby, who would always get paranoid about security and stuff, like he made me fire people in Manila at a stadium because he thought they were all like crooks. Like he would get weird sometimes. But he was worried about a stage door from the audience going backstage, and he said to the, you know, me, like, hey, there's nobody guarding that door and it's not locked or something. I'm worried about that for later. And I went and told like the house manager, I said, hey, can we get a sign like on that door, like private or backstage or something? He goes, we don't need a sign. They know not to go through that door. They're not going to go through that door because they don't belong there, and they wouldn't do it out of their own personal thing. We don't need a sign. We don't need to lock this stuff up. And it blew my mind. And that's not to say there aren't problems and crime and whatever, and bikes don't get stolen. They do, you know, but there's an order, and there's a looking out for your fellow man that we've lost in this country, and we have to get it back. Because it's no way to live. You're not a civilized union if kids are walking into schools and shooting other kids, if people are cutting themselves, you know, each other off in traffic and driving around with these jacked up engines. It sounds like the freaking blitzkrieg. You know, what happens if you're an older woman, you're going, or man or whatever, you're going down the highway and these cars go past you sounding like they're blowing up? Give you a heart attack. You know, the aggression in our society. All of our entertainment is people getting murdered. Right? You know, this loud, you know, idiocy, this aggression, this violence in all aspects of our society. We have to make peace with this because it's going to explode, and they're looking for it to explode. You know, they're manipulating that. That's what they want. That's why Trump's at UFC and all this kind of stuff. He wants these meatheads, these jacked up morons to take up arms for him, and they're going to be so freaking poor and desperate, they will. And he's going to keep blaming the left. Now he's blaming the migrants. Then it'll be the Democrats. Then it'll be, you know, Jewish Americans. It'll be, you know, whoever's remaining who isn't a MAGA person. And he's going to point to them because he's not going to admit that he's the reason the economy tanked. And it's going to tank. We're going to go into a massive global recession if we're not lucky, if we don't have some kind of miracle. Because no one's going to stop him. They're not going to stand up to him. You heard about Jeff Bezos today, right? They were going to put, you know, the tariff cost. They were going to work it into the website when you bought something on Amazon or their sister site. I didn't even know they had like a off-brand Amazon site, but apparently they do. And I think that's the site that was going to show the extra charges due to the tariffs. And Trump called up Jeff this morning and bitched him out. And then they publicly were like, we're not going to do that. I'm sorry. You should do that. You should grow a pair, little Jeff Bezos. You know what I mean? You suck up. You've already ruined half the planet with your crappy company. You know? Stand up. But he folded. And Hollywood will fold too, right? Because they're all on Amazon. You know, that's the movie studios now. That's dangerous. Having like our entertainment come from the same algorithmic content generator, Netflix and all this crap. You know, these guys are cowards. The head of 60 Minutes, Bill Owen, I think his name is, he retired last week. I'm sure you heard about it. You know, he'd been there for 26 years. He'd worked at CBS for 40 years. That is such a lifetime in live TV. I can't tell you. I did 25 years in live TV. You know, I did a lot of shows for 20 years, over 20 years, the Tony Awards, you know, and I worked with a lot of my same people I began with in 93. I did it for a long time, okay? And I was just a talent guy. Being the executive producer, you know, of 60 Minutes, he wasn't the executive producer, I don't think, the whole time, but 40 years, started as like a runner at CBS. He left that gig because the Trump administration was editing their shows and telling them what to do, Paramount. You know, editing the content on behalf of Trump, to please Trump. He's going to infiltrate all aspects of our culture with this MAGA bullshit. You know, so you're going to get subsequent generations raised on this idiocy. That's what you need to fear. Because they're going to be, like, it's hard to change the minds of the ones in our generation, right? Or my, you know, we're all relatively the same age, probably listens to this podcast. You know, like, you can see how difficult it's been to deal with that. You can see how many elderly people spent their final years enraged because of Trump, because they watch Fox News and they believe the bullshit. So they're angry old men, and they're angry old men with guns. And then you're going to have angry young men with guns. You're just going to have an angry nation. And we can't be angry. I'm angry as shit too. You know, I've spent too much of my life pissed off, and I'm given to be pissed off. I'm an alcoholic. I get resentments all the time. They're poison to me. And a lot of people in the program are just like not paying attention. You know, they can't deal with it. They're not watching the news, and I don't blame them. They're still happy, joyous, and free. I'm not one of them. I'm not going to pick up and drink over it, but, you know, my job involves paying attention to this to some extent. You know, and I care too much. I read these articles. I see this thing about these soup kitchens, you know, like they're losing money that they planned on having, you know, support from our government to feed people in their communities who need food. How do you not do such a basic thing? At the same time, you got a guy who's jetting off to fall asleep at the Vatican, you know, for the Pope's funeral, who's jetting off to Michigan today to do a circle jerk in front of a bunch of like MAGA townies up in Michigan, talking about his great 100 days. And I saw the clips. You know, he's just babbling his normal bullshit and lying and stuff. You know, and CNN guys there, Scott Jennings, like, it's going to get so intertwined. And if you're counting on corporate, like, media people to do the right thing, trust me, they will not. Because that's what happened in 2016. When he ran, I tried to get so many of my colleagues to speak out, guys who knew just the same kind of shit I do. And, like, we're all kind of on a low level, and they were scared. They were like, no, I'm not gonna. I'll never work again. I need my job, you know? But the higher up the ranks I went, people were like, no, I'm not even gonna consider doing that. And Mark Burnett said he would sue anybody who spoke out. You know, behind the scenes, that was the word that went out to the former employees in Hollywood. So they, you know, they circle the wagons and try to protect the bottom line. And that's cowardly. You know, that's greedy and cowardly in normal times, but you kind of expect it. You know, making a buck is what matters. But now when it's existential, when it's life and death, his views on climate change alone should make anybody with a brain who cares about the future of this planet and their children and their children's children should be standing up to this guy with all their might. On that issue alone, he's a criminal, you know, against humanity. And that barely even gets mentioned. We've given up on the climate stuff practically. He's shutting down NOAA, National Oceanic Atmospheric Association or whatever, administration. I don't even have the energy to tell this story right now, but like I did a thing with Dan Basta, who used to be the head of NOAA, and Graham Nash about 10, 12 years ago or something. We were invited to Woods Hole, Massachusetts, where they have a big research center and they do all this oceanographic research and, saving whales and all this kind of stuff. And Graham lived in Hawaii for decades and was very involved in all that and the whales and the environment, from the beginning. So he was getting honored with this award for his environmental stewardship in this particular weekend. It was in the summer. It's beautiful, Woods Holes in Cape Cod, if you don't know. And so we get invited to this whole weekend thing, and there's a gala dinner, and Graham's going to perform at one point, and there's all this cool stuff. And it began with a breakfast, like outside across from the docks, if you've ever been there, where they have these big research vessels. We're at some nice local, Cape Cod type brunch place, and we're sitting around this long table, and Dan Baster's the head of it, the agency is at the head, and Graham is there, and I'm, Graham's a road manager, so I'm kind of keeping a low profile, and I'm there with our publicist too, Michael Jensen, if any of you guys know Michael. And this little girl walks up to the table with like a pen and a piece of paper, and there's these scientists there and stuff, So I'm like, oh, she's going to, her parents probably sent her over to get Graham's autograph or something, because I'm like, she's too young to, know who Graham is, but parents probably sent her over or something. This will be cute. And then she starts to speak, and she ignores Graham. She doesn't pay attention to Graham, and she talks to one of these climate scientists. And she's like, you're my hero. I know what you've done to help save whales, and I had a lemonade stand this summer trying to raise money. And I sent you money because I believe so much in what you're doing. Would you sign my little note or something? And it just blew me away. It just floored me. I mean, this is like an 11-year-old girl. I couldn't believe it. She knew who the scientist was. I didn't. And she was already taking initiatives to get involved. And it was like that was the rock star. And in that moment, we had sort of been talking about ways we could elevate climate change to the public. That was kind of the ostensible reason for the weekend. Besides giving him the award, Dan Baster wanted to know, like, how could we make a difference? What can we do? Like, how can we let people know about the good work we're doing? And I had like an epiphany in that moment. I spoke up and raised my hand. I said, what about this? What if we do a show where it's like Jacques Cousteau meets like Behind the Music, where I take rock stars and we go out and do whale tagging? Take Neil Young out whale tagging, or Eddie Vedder out to look at, volcanoes, or, Neil Young to study, whatever, Springsteen to look at tornado. He was like, dude, I'll give you a submarine. He goes, you give me Bruce, I'll put you in a submarine, dude. I'll let you have access to all of our research vessels all over the world, dude. We have research stuff all over the world. That's a brilliant idea. Let's do it. And Graham got really excited about the idea, and we worked on it for years. Artists for the Ocean, and I got Rockefeller Foundation involved, and it never ended up happening for reasons I don't need to get into here. Things don't work out sometimes. But it was a good idea. I'm not saying it because it was my idea. I'm saying it because, like, back then, we still cared enough to try and address climate change, right? But we weren't getting the word out as to what was happening, and we needed younger people to think like the new rock stars are the climate warriors, or the people trying to change this, because nothing matters more than this. And we should educate people as to the various ways you could get out there in the world and help save the planet and live a kick-ass life, like be outdoors. You want to live at the beach or whatever, like, in the mountains, whatever. There's all kinds of cool things that you could get involved with. And here's the kind of wonky scientific stuff. So you tune in because you see Lady Gaga or something, but then you end up learning about a subject and seeing like research scientists and all this kind of stuff. And we led the world in that kind of stuff. Research science, medical science, we did the right thing, and we poured our vast wealth into that. And, like the dinner they had later that night, there was dudes from all over the world, all these genius scientists, these Dutch guys and whatever. We had this crazy dinner, and like, these guys are all characters too. They're always characters. It's a cool world. Like, we've got to go to CERN on a Crosby, Stills and Nash tour. They were all invited to CERN, and which is a big nuclear research center in Switzerland and stuff. I stayed back at the hotel with Stills, But I met all the guys because the scientists came to the concert, and they're all like wearing Ramones t-shirts. They're all into rock and roll and long hair. You know, there's cool, quirky people involved in science and medical research and all that stuff. And we're killing all that. You know, we're defunding all of that. So forget about the fact it's going to make the world incredibly dangerous, right? If you're out on a sailboat this summer and you're not getting advanced, like, you know, weather reports, you're not going to know when the big hurricane is coming or something. Like, it's deadly. You know, it's disastrous. And we led the world in that kind of stuff. You know, like, there's going to be a void now that we're not doing it, and it's going to impact people directly in their lives. And that's the point, right? They're trying to destroy the planet. They're trying to destroy this country. So Trump can become, you know, the king, and he can have a few oligarchs around him, and ExxonMobil can drill in the Grand Canyon or wherever they want, and you can, you know, frack and, you know, drill baby drill and burn coal and every kind of stupid thing that we haven't grown out of that has brought the planet to its knees in like 200 years. You know, the Industrial Revolution hasn't been that long. You know, how long have we had cars? 150 years? Not even. You know, combustion engines, not that long for the damage done. The planet's been here millions of years. Humans been living tens of thousands of years. Or actually, it's 2,000 years, right? It was two people in a garden, and that's how it started. I forgot. Forget about that other thing I just said. It was a miracle, you know, but you get my point. You know, the planet's been doing fine until we come up with this. Wow, look at this new modern power we have. Look at these engines. Look how much we can destroy with these things, and how much money and wealth we can create, and how we can use it in a military way. We did all that. We made a mess of it because we're children emotionally. We're children spiritually. You know, you get idiots like Elon Musk. They get all the money in the world. They want to spend their whole life trying to get to Mars. We don't need to go to Mars when grandma's starving in a soup kitchen and babies are getting deported. You need to fix this place when towns are getting wiped off the map from floods. You know, it's summertime. It's going to happen again this summer. You're going to watch. Places are going to wash away. Right? You got idiots who get all this money and they got the maturity of a 14-year-old boy. Right? It's like there's been so much money, and then people think they're like cartoon characters, you know, because of the Marvel movies and all this crap that people consume. Like, good for you, more power to do it. I've never seen any of it. I don't know what the Avengers are, any of this crap I always see commercials for. Like, I saw my last Star Wars movie when I was in elementary school. You know, I know everyone's into that shit. I'm not. I'm not judging you for being into it, but it seems to have influenced a generation of men to the point that they're like infantilized about the real world. They think being a man is the Iron Man or going to Mars or being some kind of Bond villain. No, being a man is taking care of vulnerable people in your community, making sure kids got a safe place to sleep at night, that they're protected, making sure you have equal opportunities for everybody in your community. You know, making sure you're welcoming refugees, making sure you're reaching out around the world to make sure other places are good, especially if you understand the impact that your economy and our imperialism at points in this American century have completely fucked other nations. And a lot of those nations are suffering because of that. And they're trying to come here for a better life because we have had a hand in destroying their lives back home. And what do? We demonize them. You know? We torture them and punish them. I just read about a father getting deported to El Salvador. The mother got deported to Argentina, and they put the 2-year-old baby in foster care. And that's not an isolated story. We've also deported children who've had cancer and stuff. You think of that. Think of what they're doing in your name. You got to... That's what you have to fight against. That's the culture that you have to reach, because these townies don't get it. I'm going to start a show called Townie Talk, where I'm just going to address the morons I went to high school with who believe this shit, because they're not getting the news. You know, and when we would smoke pot together and listen to Led Zeppelin, you weren't so much of an asshole. You know, that you would be okay with that. But now they're insulated from reality and they can feel okay about it because they're in the MAGA zone and they're probably illegals. They were probably in a gang. They weren't in a gang. You're deporting them because you have tattoos? Have you been to America recently? You walk into a restaurant, grandma's got a neck tattoo. You know what I mean? You go to half of the towns in this country, all you see is a vape store and a tattoo parlor. You know? So you're demonizing them for having tattoos? Like, it's just, you know, it's stupid, but they buy it. They buy the bullshit because they're not discerning. You know? They don't believe they're getting bullshitted. And they don't understand the world they live in anymore. You know, they think Democrats and education are bad, right? He's attacking higher education. He's attacking law firms, and now the law firms, by the way, in his executive order, he said the law firms will defend the cops if they get charged for, you know, shooting protesters or something, the pro bono law firm. So that's what Paul Weiss is going to be doing. You know, you're going to be like defending Derek Chauvin next year, the next Derek Chauvin or the next Kyle Rittenhouse or something. You know, he's setting it all up. He's building a machine to dominate and grind democracy into the dust, and we cannot let him. And how you stop him is you tell those fucking townies that you know that they're morons, and you show them what is really happening, what Trump's really doing. And you don't just spread the Trump clips because you get a lot of likes. You try to explain it to people. You try to reach people's hearts and their minds, you know, and you applaud their efforts because this country is full of a lot of caring, cool, kick-ass people. We all know that. It's not all bad, but there's a lot of bad folks. And even those folks are not beyond redemption. One-on-one, these guys are fine if you talk to them. They really are. You know, but it's the group think. You know, it's the walking in lockstep and accepting the dogma and this sort of labels of he's a Democrat. You know, I tried to make peace with some of these guys a few years, you know, in this era. And I went to see my friends, like, kid play baseball. It was like playing in my town or something, you know, and I hadn't seen this guy in 30 years, friend of mine from high school and stuff. And he came to meet me and he was like, yeah, my wife didn't want me to come meet you, dude. She was like, you're going to meet them? They're Democrats. He's a Democrat. And he was like, yeah, well, I've known the guy for 30 years. Like, well, he's not going to bite me. Like, what does that mean? But this guy was married to somebody who lived in such fear or contempt of Democrats and she didn't know me. She probably knew who I was, but like, you know, he's a Democrat. You're going to talk to him? Like, that's unheard of. That would have never happened, you know, in our society 30 years ago, 25 years ago. And, you know, obviously I don't talk to that guy anymore. He took umbrage to me calling people morons on Facebook who voted for Trump. But you are a fucking moron if you voted for this guy, especially this dude, because he's like not a rich guy. You know what I mean? He's the kind of guy who's going to need what our government was providing, as are most of us, right? You need roads. You need public education. You need health care. You need Medicaid. You need Social Security. You do. Even if you personally don't, you need it for your community. Trust me. You don't need another tax break for billionaires. But by the time you figure that out, it's going to be too late. You know? The time is like we're in a window that's closing. Like, I am not trying to freak you out. It's not dark yet, right? But it's getting there. It's getting really dark, and you don't want to sleep on this stuff. You need to, you know, you need to keep your powder dry and be very strategic about how you fight back on this. You don't burn out. Don't tune out. Don't get all your energy sucked out of you watching online or sending all your money to some grifter. You don't need to send any money to anybody. Save your money for the soup kitchens. That's who needs your money. The animal shelters, the refugees. No PAC needs your money anymore. There's plenty of money in politics. It's not the problem. Okay? You know? If you want to make a difference, if you want to just do whatever you want to do, I don't want to tell you what to do, but if you want to stop this guy, you got a very narrow opportunity, and your best way to do it is to really understand the culture, because it's so intertwined with American culture. You think of law enforcement, right? There's two kinds of people in this country, right? There's the people who understand that cops can be corrupt and they've been historically brutal to minorities. That's just a fact. If you know anything about policing in this country, that is a fact. And I've known a lot of cops, a lot more than most people because of my job. And one-on-one, they're all good guys. I haven't known too many of them who aren't racists. At best, they're mildly racist. At worst, they're virulently racist. You know, my old roommate became NYPD. They told him, your job is to beat up black people. And they didn't say black people. You know, they used the N-word. That's what his sergeant told him. You go out there and you beat up. That's what he was doing. This is the Giuliani 90s. They were just cracking down and brutalizing people. You know, stripping them of their rights, searching them on subways, you know, any kind of suspicion. It was the whole broken windows theory of policing that Ray Kelly, you know, and Giuliani made popular with these white suburban folks. And it worked. And then those people were like, hey, I went to see the Yankees game last week. There was no more squeegee guys. He's cleaning up the city. They loved it because he was attacking people they were scared of, that they didn't like. That's not to say there weren't problems in the cities. They were. But again, as a result of systemic racism, right? As a result of white flight, which is the same people who left in the 60s and 70s and moved up to the suburbs where I live and out to Long Island and stuff. And they brought their xenophobia with them. They brought their mentality that they had when they got off the boat and lived in a ghetto in New York City, and the Italians were here, and the Polish people were here, and the Irish were here, and all the people fought each other, and everybody, you know, hated on the blacks, right, if you were white. Because that was also, you know, an early part of the myth of America was like, if they made the indentured servants resent the enslaved people, then they'd never look at who was really screwing them over, you know? And that's central. If you read Howard Zinn, that's central to the American story, people's history of the United States. You know, the wealthiest among us getting the people with the least to resent each other rather than, you know, the giant industrialist or plantation owner who's really got the power. Trump's using the same playbook, and he's getting these people to applaud billionaires while these billionaires and these politicians are robbing them of their future. And the people are like, oh, that's so cool. He's making America great again. He's cleaning up the corruption. You're not getting any of that money, dude. They're going to put that in a slush fund, keep it for themselves. Sovereign wealth fund. That money's going into Trump's Bitcoin operation, which he's made over $555 million in 100 days. He launched it right before he got inaugurated. It's making a fortune. They've never really made money before, the Trumps, right? It was all kind of a ruse that they were rich, but he was always leveraged, and it was his name on the side of the buildings. Like, he was always going bankrupt and broke. He's an idiot, and he's crazy, and he's an addict. So he's lost more money than most people have made. But he never had like a real cash cow until now. This Bitcoin shit is like the greatest thing in the world to them. And he was opposed to it in his first term. And now that, you know, his sons were like, no, this is free money, dude. They're just giving us money. This is the best way to launder money. They can just buy a meme coin, you know, or Bitcoin or whatever the fuck it's called, and the money goes in your pocket. And you don't have to give them anything in return except for access, except for favors. So they love it. They're opening a private club in Georgetown, the executive branch, right? It's going to be a members-only club, $500,000 to buy in and monthly dues. So you can hobnob with Don Jr. and Eric Trump. And it started by the, you know, who's the real estate developer who's like Trump's Kissinger. Whatever his name is, his kids are the ones starting this club with Don Jr. You know, the guy who's flying around everywhere. His name is just escaping me right now. New York real estate guy. I know who he is. You guys can put it in the comments. Anyway, that guy who's flying to Moscow and kissing Putin's ass, his sons are opening a, you know, $500,000, you know, a member buy-in thing to influence the administration. You've never seen grift at the level that they're grifting, and they know you can't stop them now because they're doing so much of it, and they've fired all the watchdogs, all the, you know, all the inspectors generals are gone. They own the DOJ. It's a fucking clown show over there. They own the Congress. There's no oversight. There's no investigations. There's no legislation. He hasn't passed a single piece of legislation in 100 days. It's all executive orders, which other presidents used sparingly. When Trump found out he could do that, because he didn't know how to do politics, he doesn't know how to get bills passed, he doesn't respect our system, so he'll just do a EO, and that's all he does every day. He signs executive orders, and he has trophy time where he stands in front of a sports team and makes a commercial for, for the loyal followers to show on Fox News how cool he is. Again, it plays into that cultural thing. Wow, look how cool he is. He's joking around with the Eagles and the Dodgers. He's one of us. He's cool. No, he's not cool. He's a fucking asshole, and he's a liar, and he's the dumbest person this country has ever put in a position of power, and we're going to pay a price that we can't even comprehend right now. And I'm sure most people listening to this have a pretty good idea of the damage done, but you haven't really seen the results. Yes, people have died, but 25 million people are facing starvation in Sudan alone who were eating from meals that we provided through USAID and our partners. We were feeding 25 million people who were facing starvation. That was cut off months ago. So when you see the results of our retreating from the world and caring for people, it's going to be a horror show. And he's doing the same thing here. This country will be a horror show. But when it's around the whole globe, it's going to create problems that we haven't even foreseen properly yet. It's very, very dangerous, as you well know. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. It's just it'll be a miracle if we're not in some kind of World War III giant, conflict, or if Putin isn't trying to just roll across Europe. So we got to stay strong. We got to celebrate the sanity. Thank God Canada did the right thing. Of course they're gonna, but 6 months ago it was looking like Poliver was gonna win, right? They were falling under the same bullshit that we fell under. It's the same bad actors. It's Putin and all this right-wing media and podcasters and all this bro culture, toxic, mediocre white dude douchebaggery they're not immune to. There's a lot of white dudes up in Canada if you haven't visited lately. And they're not all Gord Downey, and they're not all the Trailer Park Boys who were actually very smart, cool guys and good friends of mine, But there are meatheads too. They have their conservative Alberta and all this stuff. It's North America. It's the same stock. It's happening in Europe. People can be manipulated all over the world with the same stuff, especially when it's so well engineered. And Putin and these guys, they know what they're doing with this disinformation, and they're picking at age-old wounds. People are unevolved in terms of each other and in terms of racism. We've been tripping over that since the beginning of time, and it's time to get over it. It's stupid. It's like not using your brain right. You're here to be a channel for peace, to be of service, to love and experience life. You should wake up joyful. This thing is over in a blink of an eye, even if you're living to be 100 years. I watch birds all day. They never miss a moment. They're never daydreaming, man. They're always alert. They're looking around. Life is right here. It's happening right now. Look, the sun's out. Look, there might be food. Look, there's a butterfly. Oh, look, there's another bird. Oh, shit, I'm going to fly over here. Oh, now I'm going to sing a song on a branch. That's a good use of your time, right? That's being alive. We have to come alive. We have to wake up as to who we really are and what our presence and purpose is on this life. It's in this life. It's like George Harrison said. Was it George Harrison? John Lennon? What in the world are we doing here? Certainly not to live in fear or pain of fear, whatever. That I've quoted that wrong on this show before. Instant karma. Your natural state is not to be pissed off and resentful of your fellow man and stuff. And that's the theme of this show. I don't know how to not be that. I struggle with that. I have an ego. I'm born in human skin. I have resentments and stuff. You know what I mean? I'm not God. Neither are you. I don't know who God is. I don't really care. Not that I don't care about a higher power or something. It's just like, I don't care how you define God. I'm not going to go to war with you and tell you it's wrong. If it works for you, more power to you, as long as it doesn't, mess with me. As long as you're not calling me an infidel and coming after me, do what you got to do. I've used all kinds of things as a higher power in my recovery. It's been a cat sometimes. It's been music at other times. It doesn't matter. It's the sun. It's a tree, it's the wind, it's anything bigger than yourself that gives you strength. And that can be other people. Especially now, it has to be other people. You know how I've talked about, like, when we all come together at a concert, you're at Springsteen or something, or Dead, or whatever you listen to, and everybody's, feeling the vibe and singing together, and how good that feels, how that lifts you up inside. That's because it's a power greater than yourself. It's because you're in community and you realize there's a vibe, man. We can do great things. And we've lost that. We've lost those kind of traditions. Not completely. They still exist, and people certainly search for it, and it exists. I mean, obviously we haven't lost music and community. It happens all the time. It happens in churches, it happens in concert halls. But my point is, when you feel that happening, that's something to wake you up and point you towards what a higher power could be in your life. And you need that power for your own strength. And you can use it to overcome obstacles. You can use it in any way you want to use it, but you need to find it. We all need to find it now, because the lack of it is what you're seeing that's gone so wrong in this administration, because there is no higher power to Donald Trump. He is God, and he's a broken man, and he's an addict, right? So his brain is riddled with resentment, and feeling less than, and self-centered fear. I've met him. He reeks of fear. He reeks of other things too. He reeks in general, right? And he is like Reek when he's walking around behind Putin, carrying his pants pocket, when Putin just showed him all the videotapes that he took of him in Trump Tower, right? But Trump is riddled with the isms. Right? He doesn't know a higher power. He doesn't know about being of service. He doesn't know that, like, the earth is a living organism that we all have to nurture and protect. He sees everything as binary. It's either given him something or it's not, and it's dead to him. Everything is transactional, and everything is broken in that guy. And his family's the same way. I don't know Mary, I'm not talking, but his kids, his immediate family, they're scumbags. They're all just scumbags. Kushner, greedy scumbags. I'm sorry, I don't like to talk ill of people, but they're very unimpressive human beings, especially with the amount of privilege they've been given in life. They just give nothing back. They did nothing after 9/11. They did nothing on The Apprentice when I worked on it. In the era I worked on Celebrity Apprentice, it was the time where you would always invite vets to sit in the audience. I did the Celebrity Apprentice finales. So there were these live tapings on NBC, like Sunday nights or whatever. And you would invite, the front row, you'd have wounded vets. This was sort of the height of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was the one show where they didn't bother to do that. They gave all their, extra comp tickets to, the Russian mob friends from Bay Ridge. Literally. You've heard me talk about that before. It was and Hell's Angels. And I got no beef with the Hell's Angels, but, people you would not expect to see at something like that, you would see. Because that's who Trump attracts, And he attracts, in terms of his greed, he attracts other greedy people. That's why his cabinet is as loathsome as he is. Howard Lutnick, this guy is scum of the earth. I won't even get into it right now. He was Jeffrey Epstein's next door neighbor. He bought the house from Jeffrey's brother who brokered the deal. He has decades of compromise. He was holding fundraisers for Trump there, a couple weeks before Epstein got popped the first time. And he had, all the bad guys who were frequenters of Epstein's, what he sold in that brothel. He had them all come out, Steve Wynn and Giuliani and all these guys. And they came and they ponied up. And I guarantee you that meeting was hey, they're gonna pop Epstein. We'll make it go away, but you gotta get Trump reelected. You gotta pony up some money. That was May of 19. He was arrested, Epstein, I think, over the 4th of July weekend, and he was dead by August or something, right? Problem solved. Howard Lutnick's still having the fundraisers in that townhouse. He has them in the Hamptons in the summer. You know, he's also Cantor Fitzgerald guy who didn't happen to be at work that day when Saudi Arabia was really pissed, you know, and funded and sent the people to do 9/11. You know, and he cut off all the widows. 658 employees died. He stopped their paychecks a couple weeks later. Imagine doing that. The widows hated him. I met him for the first time shortly after that, and I was not a fan, and I told him as much at a big fancy fundraiser when he was sitting there all smug. You know, he made those people suffer instantly. His own brother died in that thing, and he just had no compassion. He was like, oh, they'd want me to continue to make money. That's who these people are. They're just evil fucking people, and they've taken over, and they're making good people suffer. You know, and they're going to fundamentally change the character of this nation if we let them. This stuff at the Kennedy Center, going after PBS, inserting himself into all kinds of sports. He wants to be Pope now. They're doing the joke about him being Pope. I'm not even making that up. Obviously, he's not serious, but, you know, Lindsey Graham sent out a tweet like, Catholics should take this seriously. I know this is outside of the box, but he would be a great Pope. Like, are you kidding me? Like, what planet are we on? But that's what they're looking for. This God figurehead like whack job. We're in a cult now. And I'll shut up about this because I've been talking for a while, but like what I warn people about, and I've met Donald Trump many times. You know, I'm not friends with him. I wasn't inner circle. Like some people get it wrong. I worked on a TV show he was on. I took care of his daughter, Ivanka, and I worked on some of those pageants in the 90s. And I lived in New York since 1984, so I knew what a scumbag he was. It was no secret. Okay? But I tell people this. When you think of Pol Pot, and you think of Hitler, and you think of Mussolini, you know, some of the bad guys in the world, think of Donald Trump, because he's just as bad as them. He'll give them a run for their money. He is a twisted individual who's gotten away with things already that most people wouldn't have gotten away with. You can read about that stuff in my Substack and Noel's notes, you know. I still talk to a friend of mine who got groomed by him when she was 12 and taken lessons at his ice rink. By, you know, her late teens, she ended up in Epstein's place with him. And she would say, you wouldn't believe what those men did to girls, you know, and I would believe it because that stuff wasn't a secret and he got away with it. A lot of guys got away with that stuff, you know. That's who these people are morally, and now they're in charge of everything, you know, in charge of the military. And you got Pete Hegseth and these kind of people, you know. This press secretary chick is just God, you know. She's 27. Pure propaganda, you know. They all have Botox and fake noses and stuff. It's just like, it's bizarre. It's like we're living in some horrible, you know, some horrible movie that never ends. But, you know, we're not alone. I can't find the thing to put my microphone on. We're not alone. We got each other, okay? I'm sorry to rant at you. Anyway, I know it's stressful. I know it's a scary time, but like all the things that have always worked, prayer and meditation, community, being of service, helping other people, nature, animals, music, art, it's all available to us. It's all right there. And it's never mattered more. And it's never, you know, it'll never be more vibrant than when you really need it. Somebody said that, you know, like people don't like to, somebody famous, they don't like to support the arts until they need the arts, you know? That's a real thing, you know? You need that now, because that's the antidote. Because, like, what we're dealing with is a lack of, you know, emotional sophistication and culture. It doesn't, I'm not talking like everybody has to be at Lincoln Center, right? But you need to connect with your own humanity and what you have in common with your fellow man. You need to feel something when you hear a little kid has been separated from their mom, a breastfeeding child, a baby, as I mentioned before, is in a foster home right now instead of with her mom who got deported. You need to feel something when that happens. We don't kick out U.S. citizens. You know, we don't kick out refugees. At least we didn't. Now we are, you know. Okay, I'm going to shut up now, because otherwise I'm going to start talking about these ICE guys, you know, because if you're paying attention, I mean, these guys are just fucking brutalizing people. And it pisses me off because I know the type of personality that's attracted to being that kind of gig. And like, a lot of them are sadists, and they're probably enjoying this stuff. And that doesn't mean everybody who wears a badge is bad, but like, if you do wear a badge and you are bad, these are good times for you, because you know Trump is not going to, you know, hold you accountable. And to demonize immigrants the way he is, that's when you get all the crazy abuses. And you just don't want to do that. We need to learn. You know, how many wars have we fought where people went and, you know, abused people in country, you know? We learned. We need to learn the lessons of Vietnam and all these things, you know. You don't mistreat people. You don't demonize people. You don't call them the enemy when they're just coming to work hard, you know. At least I would hope you don't. You know, for a long time we were a country that wouldn't have done that, you know. And you see how much has happened in 100 days. You're not going to recognize this place in another 100 days. Okay? I'm going to shut up now before I depress anybody further, but, you know, pick your poison, you know? Anyway, I'll be here. You'll be here. You know, you're never going to make me be afraid. You're never going to make me not love. You're never going to make me not speak out and stand up to injustice. I will do that while there's a breath left in my body with no fear, because I got love on my side. You know what I mean? So do you. So thank you for listening as always. I love you guys. I'll try to do these a little more regularly. I say that all the time, but I really mean it. Until then, check out Noel's Notes on Substack. You can like this or share it or whatever you do on YouTube. You can listen commercial free on Patreon if you want to support the podcast. There's all kinds of options to get more Noel in your life. Avail yourself of them. Anyway, until next time, peace, guys. Have a good one.